They told you silence was maturity, that being quiet was wise, that not speaking about the pain was the godly thing to do. But what if I told you, you were trained to stay silent, not safe, and this silence, it isn't peace. It's spiritual suffocation. Millions suffer in silence, thinking God is testing them, but in truth, the enemy has simply taught them to muzzle their voice, their trauma, their truth. And when you bury what breaks you, it doesn't die, it grows in secret, in shadows, in shame. Beloved, this message isn't just another talk, it is a mirror, a confrontation, a lifeline for the soul still trapped in the silence of survival. Stay with me, because your voice isn't just yours, it's a weapon in the hands of God. Many were never protected, only programmed. As children, as believers, as wounded adults, you were told, don't talk about that, don't cry, don't question. This isn't safety, it's suppression. In Proverbs 18:21, it says, life and death are in the power of the tongue. So why would the enemy not want you to speak? Because your silence is his permission. Moses didn't stay silent. Nathan didn't stay silent. Jesus, the lion and the lamb, didn't stay silent. When he saw injustice in the temple, he flipped tables. When he saw a woman in shame, he lifted her. In Ecclesiastes 3:7, it says there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. Many have only learned the first, but God is now calling for the second. Unspoken pain becomes spiritual poison. You smile on the outside, but your soul limps through the day. In Psalm 32:3, David confessed, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. There is no healing without truth, and no truth without voice. Your silence isn't noble, it's expensive. Let there be light, not think light. Say it, declare it. Even creation had to be spoken before it could exist. You were made in the image of the Creator, which means you were born to speak life, not just live it. In Jeremiah 1:9, God said, I have put my words in your mouth. So why are you still whispering when you were called to roar? What's the first thing shame does? It silences you. What's the first thing fear does? It isolates you. And what's the first thing religion sometimes teaches you? Stay quiet and endure. But Jesus asked blind Bartimaeus, what do you want me to do for you? Not because he didn't know, but because he needed him to say it. Speak it. Faith is not just believing, it is declaring. Romans 10:10. Sometimes we keep silent not to protect ourselves, but to protect the systems we fear. Religious systems, cultural traditions, even family legacies. But Jesus didn't come to protect man-made systems, he came to free captives. He said in Luke 4:18, he has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, to set the oppressed free. That mission requires a voice, not just a heart. Yes, speaking truth can cost you relationships. It can cost you your position, your comfort, your image, but staying silent, that costs you your peace, your identity, your legacy. Esther had to speak. Even at the risk of death, in Esther 4:14, Mordecai asked her, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? What if your voice was the key to someone else's deliverance? What you say today teaches your children how to feel tomorrow. If you normalize silence, they will inherit suppression. But when you speak truth in love, in faith, in boldness, you start a ripple of freedom. In Joel 3:10, it says, let the weak say, I am strong. Why would the weak be told to speak? Because speaking is strength, even when the voice trembles. You grew up believing that keeping quiet was the same as being wise. You were taught that silence was noble, that enduring without complaint made you strong, respectable, even spiritual. But what if I told you that what you thought was strength was actually fear wearing a disguise? What if silence wasn't safety at all, but a subtle form of bondage? You see, silence can feel like control, but in reality, it is often control over you. From childhood to adulthood, many are conditioned not to speak, trained by trauma, by culture, by flawed religion, and even by the voices of those who claim to love them. But the silence you were trained into didn't keep you safe. It just kept you quiet while the pain continued. The abuse went unspoken, the shame grew in the shadows, and the enemy rejoiced because as long as you stay silent, you stay stuck. In the spiritual realm, the most dangerous thing about silence is that it slowly erodes your identity without making a sound. You start to lose the sense of who you are, not because you sinned, but because you never told the truth. not to others, not to God, not even to yourself. The lie becomes your language and the truth. It feels like rebellion, but here's what Scripture tells us. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. John 8:32. That means truth is not just a concept, it's an act, a choice, a spoken thing. And until you speak it, you will always confuse silence with safety, but silence never saved anyone. Truth did, voice did, and today the Spirit of God is calling you not to stay quiet, but to rise, to speak, to be made whole. Because what was once your defense must now become your deliverance. What you suppress today doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes something deeper, darker, and more controlling. You think you've moved on because you're no longer talking about it, but your body remembers. Your soul remembers. Your relationships carry its fingerprints. Suppression is not healing. It's spiritual procrastination. We live in a world that rewards performance and punishes vulnerability. So instead of processing pain, we press it down. Instead of voicing confusion, we fake certainty. Instead of admitting weakness, we wear masks of strength. And this is where the inner conflict begins. You become divided within yourself, what you show the world and what you hide from yourself. But the Bible warns us in Luke 8:17, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." That's not a threat, it's a promise of healing. God cannot heal what you continue to hide, and the enemy knows that as long as you suppress the truth, it will eventually turn into self-sabotage. The anger turns inward. The grief manifests in decisions you can't explain. The silence becomes a storm behind your smile. Suppression may keep others comfortable, but it slowly makes you a stranger to yourself. And until you confront what you've buried, it will keep resurrecting in your emotions, your habits, and your patterns, silently ruling your life from the shadows. In every generation, there comes a moment when silence is no longer an option. The Bible is filled with men and women who could have stayed quiet, but didn't, and because they spoke, history shifted. Joseph revealed the truth to Pharaoh and preserved a nation. Moses confronted Pharaoh with nothing but a staff and a word from God. Nathan stood before a king and exposed his sin. Esther risked her life to speak for her people, and Jesus, even before Pilate, refused to deny who he was. None of them were comfortable, none of them were safe, but all of them were called, and their voices were the very instruments God used to disrupt injustice, expose deception, and establish truth. You see, speaking up isn't about volume, it's about obedience. In Ezekiel 3:18, God tells the prophet, "When I say to a wicked person, 'You will surely die,' and you do not warn them, I will hold you accountable for their blood." That's a divine warning. When you remain silent in moments that demand truth, you become complicit in the lie. We are not called to be agreeable, we are called to be faithful. Silence is not a virtue when it protects corruption. Your voice might tremble, your heart might race, but your obedience to speak could be the very answer to someone else's deliverance. So ask yourself, are you staying silent because it's wise, or because it's safe, and is that safety protecting you, or preventing someone else's freedom? The soul has its own language, one that speaks even when the mouth is shut. When the heart is heavy and the mind can't make sense of the pain, the body becomes the storyteller. Sleepless nights, anxious thoughts, sudden anger, numbness that lingers even in moments of joy, these are not random. These are the silent screams of a soul that was taught to endure, not express. Many people think they've moved on because they've stopped talking about it, but silence is not the same as peace. Suppressing emotion doesn't erase the wound. It just buries it deeper until it begins to control everything from the shadows. In Psalm 39, 2-3, David writes, "I was silent and still, but my anguish increased. My heart grew hot within me. While I meditated, the fire burned." Even the man after God's own heart confessed, silence didn't heal him, it hurt him. When you stay quiet about pain, guilt, or shame, it festers, and eventually it will come out, but not in words. It will show up in broken relationships, destructive choices, or chronic emotional fatigue. Your soul cannot carry what only truth can release, but here is the hope. God doesn't just hear spoken prayers. He reads unspoken pain. He invites you to bring what you've buried, to speak what you've silenced. Because the soul finds rest, not when it hides, but when it is heard, and some of your deepest healing will begin the moment you stop managing your emotions and start confessing your truth. From Genesis to Revelation, God never called his people to be silent. He called them to be witnesses, to speak, to proclaim, to cry aloud and spare not. Silence was never the strategy of the Spirit. It was often the result of fear, shame, or bondage. When God placed Adam in the garden, he gave him authority not just over creation, but through naming, speaking. When the prophets rose, they didn't rise in silence, they rose in truth. John the Baptist prepared the way by crying out in the wilderness. Jesus declared in Luke 4:18, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free." Notice the word proclaim, not pretend. Not pause, proclaim. This is the divine pattern. When God wants to shift history, he doesn't just raise thinkers. He raises voices, and yet many believers have confused peace with passivity. They remain silent in moments when God is calling them to speak, afraid of being misunderstood, judged, or rejected. But make no mistake, silence in the face of injustice, abuse, or deception is not spiritual maturity, it is spiritual misalignment. The enemy wants your silence because he fears your sound, your testimony, your story, your truth. When surrendered to God becomes a weapon against the darkness. That's why you feel resistance every time you try to speak it. Because the enemy knows once you open your mouth in truth, chains start to break. Darkness starts to tremble and heaven begins to echo with power. So speak, not with arrogance but with authority, because heaven didn't give you a voice to stay quiet. It gave you a voice to declare liberty to the captives. What you avoid doesn't disappear, it only deepens. What you don't confront will eventually corrupt you. The things you refuse to face, old wounds, buried traumas, unresolved guilt, secret habits, don't stay small. They grow in silence, they gather power in secrecy, and over time they shape your identity without your permission. This is why Scripture is clear. Confession is not weakness, it's warfare. In James 5:16 we're told, "Confess your faults one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed." Healing doesn't begin with hiding, it begins with honesty. It begins with the courage to speak, even when your voice shakes. Many think that by ignoring something long enough, they're overcoming it, but repression is not redemption. Pretending something isn't there doesn't cleanse your spirit. It just delays your transformation. King David learned this the hard way. After sinning with Bathsheba and staying silent, he wrote in Psalm 32:3, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long." Silence was slowly destroying him from the inside out. But when he confronted his sin, when he finally spoke, it broke the power of shame. It opened the door for God's mercy. You see, the danger is never in the truth you tell, it's in the lie you continue to live. And the longer you postpone confrontation, the more authority you give to what's keeping you bound. God doesn't expose you to embarrass you. He reveals truth to redeem you, and what you confront with him, he will confront for you. So don't protect your silence, protect your soul, let the truth rise, and let healing begin. Yes, there is a cost to speaking. The moment you choose to break your silence, you risk being misunderstood, rejected, judged, even abandoned. Speaking your truth might cause tension in your family. It might disrupt your relationships, your reputation, or your role in the community. But there is a greater cost to not speaking, the cost of your own freedom. When you remain silent to keep others comfortable, you trade peace for performance. When you suppress your truth to avoid conflict, you begin to fracture within, and that fracture widens over time. It shows up in anxiety, in bitterness, in spiritual numbness. You begin to wonder why you're distant from God, not realizing that you've also become distant from yourself. In the book of Esther, we see this exact tension. She was queen, she had influence, she could have remained silent while her people perished. But her uncle Mordecai sent her a message that shook her soul. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from another place. And who knows but that you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther 4:14. Esther had to decide, was her comfort more valuable than her calling? Was her image more important than her integrity? God will always honor the voice that risks comfort for the sake of truth. He did it with Jeremiah, he did it with Paul, he did it with Jesus, and he wants to do it with you. Yes, there is a cost to speaking, but silence has a price too, and it's far more expensive. Don't pay with your peace what truth can purchase with freedom. Your voice is not just about you, it's about those who come after you. Every word you speak, every truth you release, becomes a seed planted in the soil of future generations. Silence may feel safe for now, but it teaches your children and your community that pain should be hidden, that truth should be feared, that healing is shameful. But when you speak, even with trembling lips, you give others permission to do the same. You break generational patterns of secrecy and suppression. You show your children that honesty is not rebellion, it's responsibility. You model what freedom sounds like. In Joel 3:10, God commands something unusual. Let the weak say, I am strong. Why would the weak be told to speak? Because strength is not always in the body. It begins in the declaration. What you say shapes what you become. God didn't tell the weak to think strength. He told them to say it, because your voice activates your future. Some of the battles you're fighting aren't even about you. They are about who's watching you. Your healing will be their blueprint. Your words will become their courage, and your freedom will be their foundation. Don't underestimate what happens when you stop silencing yourself. You're not just finding your voice, you're releasing a legacy of truth, of healing, of boldness, because the moment you speak, heaven listens, and hell trembles. You were never created to endure in silence. You were anointed to rise in boldness. The Spirit of God that lives within you is not timid, it is not afraid, it is not passive. According to 2 Timothy 1:7, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So why are you still living like silence is your assignment? Your story carries power, your pain carries purpose, your voice carries the potential to shatter cycles and awaken healing, not just in your life, but in the lives of countless others. But that power remains dormant as long as you remain quiet. The enemy knows this. That's why he fights so hard to silence the anointed, because a silenced believer is a paralyzed warrior. But this is your turning point. You weren't called to be quiet about injustice. You weren't born to hide your wounds in shame. You weren't chosen to shrink into silence. You were set apart to declare the works of the Lord, to testify, to confront, to release what has been locked up inside you for far too long. God is raising a remnant, men and women who will no longer confuse silence with strength or hiding with holiness. You are part of that remnant. It's time to open your mouth and speak life, speak truth, speak freedom, because your silence was learned, but your voice was divinely given, and now is the time to use it.